you want to kind of become the best in the world in something, and you want to kind of work towards, becoming the best at that. Now, in that related area, you're beginning to see what maybe the other trends that are sort of happening, and every once in a while you find the alignment of sort of where you are with some of these trends, and that's kind of where some of these opportunities happen. I have a friend, another IIT, who loves to say, it's hard to do right place at the right time, so I find the right place and wait for the right time.
So if there are like 6 people in this panel talking about big data, does it make sense for any one of us to start a company in big data now, or just go to some other?
So I'll tell you what was my criteria for Store Simple, right? So I had this. So like every year happens, there's these 10, 12 ideas. These companies will happen, and not necessarily I should go found one of them. And then there's this one business plan where I feel that, well, this is really related to I've had storage, enterprise infrastructure, networks, LAN acceleration, and this cloud computing thing is coming together, and how enterprises will want to kind of bring these things together. And the feeling was that if somebody was to kind of say, this is the business plan, this is the movie script, right? What's the best casting for this? And even if people didn't know me, they may end up finding me as kind of being one of the guys to kind of put in this kind of a role for this kind of a business plan. And so as I had that, I then went and just spoke to a lot of people, advisors, actually quite a few VCs, and saying, hey, I'm seeing these trends, do you really think these are there? And if so, then who are some of the other best people? I think at least the core founding team for a company like this needs somebody who has a strong sort of product management background. That's kind of me, but you need somebody who has this kind of a, I think this company in the end, the technical problem here is really going to be around storage. You need somebody who's strongly grounded in storage, and you have people who kind of connect me up with. And interestingly, I did have somebody introduce me to someone, which it was a VC, and it resulted in, typically when VCs do that as an entrepreneur, my approach was, it's a courtesy, you have to take a meeting, because I don't think the arranged marriage thing kind of works.
Can you talk a little bit about, like the first 10 engineers of a company, or, the importance of networking in terms of getting your problems resolved through outside of your own company? Like how do you achieve that?
Okay. So let me. So this comes to how do you find the first person that you kind of go into business with, and in the end, what this person had to care about was, okay, I'm really good at what I do in this area, and I have this track record for this, and is this the person I want to kind of go ahead and work with? And then when you start a company, it doesn't matter even if it's in the bottom of the recession. This is in spring 2009. General Motors has just become Government Motors, and then the company does get a Series A term sheet within a week of sort of the first meeting. And so the point I was trying to kind of go ahead and bring through was that there is a Wild West frontier companies, and then and usually those happen exceptionally well from people in their 20s, because your Hail Mary is nothing to lose. Later on in the career, it does come down to how you go ahead and kind of excel at something. Form that as a core to then bring excellence around you, and then that is what helps then attract a phenomenal core. So like if I look at the first 8 or 10 people at Store Simple was acquired 18 months ago, and since then 4 companies have started up with just the first 10 people, besides me and sort of my co-founder out on that end. So in terms of and a lot of the people who were there in the first 10 weren't necessarily from sort of, half of them were from the immediate network, but the other half were people who we had to say, okay, if we have to solve this problem, who are, where should we look for them? Who are the known experts in this field? Let's connect, reach out to them, have a conversation. They can do their reference checks on us and whether we are credible or not, and then they'll kind of come in and sort of work with us. So anyway, the Uber point being that there is an area to kind of focus on. There is this relevance thing of, is not just about how do you kind of just dabble in everything, but pick this area of engineering, this area of technology, this side of marketing, something like that, becoming absolutely among the best. Thinking of, I say when on a product you say, like the company should say a startup's first slide, once the product's up, this company is the leader in XYZ, right? And same thing applies to people where over time as you develop careers, you want to kind of focus on, I'm going to be the best in sort of this thing. And then and then the Valley has a really great formula on how great companies have happened. Every once in a while you see exceptions, but otherwise you do end up having people with a certain sort of background and caliber end up going and attracting great sort of early stage investors. I mean, some of these VC firms, the one where I am, fortunate enough to be now, has been around for 45 years, right? We're around, fourth generation of partnership. So there is this process and a culture that builds great companies. But at the core, it starts with sort of being, exceptional or excellent in something, in sort of the especially the enterprise companies.
So somebody in the audience has asked a question: what is your opinion on success of Dropbox and Box.net in spite of competition from, say, Google?
This is a question which is a near and dear question to me, and if I have time, can I take 3 minutes?
Sure.
On that one?
Yes.
So when I started StoreSimple in 2009, wanted to start to build this next franchise, next $10 billion company. The trends were there. You could see that customers are spending $50+ billion on traditional enterprise storage. You can see how cloud computing is essentially built with technologies which doesn't use most of that $50 billion spend, how the world's, and it's pretty clear that if you see the past 10, 15 years, anytime anybody has to sell into the enterprise, the core point has to be seamless, which is the enterprise should be able to change its technology without the end users ever really coming to know. And so as we created the spec for a StoreSimple product line, it was like simple, we have all these enterprise apps and we will seamlessly connect them to the cloud. Not only that, you will end up essentially becoming this unified data layer that connects sort of on-premise to the cloud so that you can pretty much move. The mass of all computing is in the data. It's easy to move apps and VMs to where the data is and the other way around. So you can move apps and VMs and we'll end up really making this hybrid thing. And that was sort of this big trend and vision. And yes, Box was already around at that time. Dropbox wasn't, but Box was. And Box was saying, yeah, we're going to go ahead and Box had been there for 3, 4, 5 years. It was in its Series C or D funding. C funding was having relatively tough time kind of making that happen. But part of the challenge people had was that they are really asking people to change the way they get their data. Files, start using this web app, things like that. And so we thought we had the better strategy. We went to build the company. A year in, we do our Series B. Year in, we do our Series C. We are continuing our trajectory. Within 3 years of funding, we now have 100 enterprise customers who have deployed the product, several $1 million per quarter in revenues, all of that. And lo and behold, you have Dropbox and Box, which actually became the $10 billion companies. And part of it was that we just didn't see. It took us at least 6 months after the iPad came out to realize what the iPad had done. But it's like top of these Andy Grove, really old book from like Only the Paranoid, right, the 10x forces. Basically, that is what happened. Once the iPad showed up, Microsoft decided they weren't going to go ahead and recognize and support new apps on that. People that needed data. Because they had this new form factor, they were more than happy to then try and learn these newer tools. And so something that hadn't happened in the enterprise where people proactively wanting to learn new tools, the iPad became the tablet that encouraged people to start using a newer way, and that is the kind of company where you saw exponential revenue growth happen. And clearly they focused on solving this problem from a delight perspective. Storage has never been about cheap storage, right? You can always raise the price down to zero. It's much more about how do you kind of help me do more with my data, how do you unlock value from it, things like that. And so it was kind of one of those things where while we had a good, successful company, Microsoft that owns StoreSimple now is doing exceptionally well from a revenues perspective. Within 2 quarters of acquisition, they've gone to 9 digits, sort of 100, things like that. But in the long term, that's going to pale in comparison to what Box and Dropbox happened, and I think the key inflection point there ended up being sort of this iPad thing and mobility, and that is one of those big forces that fundamentally, like big data, I think we didn't discuss enough about mobility, but mobility is one of those other things which is going to pretty much require a fundamental redo of everything in the enterprise sort of software stack, right? We talk of supply chain management and analytics. I think all these ERP systems are ripe for a mobile-first approach to Salesforce. I mean, create mobile apps, but all my sales guys at StoreSimple hated Salesforce because they felt that they are entering data into it, they're not getting much out of it. And why can't somebody just think of what a sales guy is doing all the time and really create the platform, mobile-first platform that sort of drives productivity. So anyway, that was a 3-minute digression out on it where the $10 billion company did happen in my segment. I just ended up building the wrong company.
Kumar, can you talk about some trends in your space before we get into the audience questions and then quickly go into a break for lunch?
Absolutely. So I run a company called Acrolinx, which none of you have heard of. It's a company that was founded in Germany. We do natural language processing and we apply it to large enterprises who have to communicate with customers, and how do we optimize the content to speak in the voice that the customer would expect and be delighted by. So think in terms of all the people that are talking about digital marketing or customer first or all these trends. And SEO, search engine optimization, is another related area. You're writing a website, you're writing a white paper, all content has become the currency of exchange between customers and companies, because how do you research something as a consumer? When you want to look up some topic, as somebody else pointed out, you do Google, search on Google. When a consumer does Google search on, let's say, Samsung TV, something or the other, through a feature or something, where do you land up on Samsung's website? It could be marketing brochure, it could be a support forum, it could be a community forum, it could be a product page, it could be anything. It's no longer controlled by Samsung as to where you will land in their website. It's no longer a guided journey on their website. The consumer is going to land up wherever they land up. What is their experience when they do that? A consumer's experience varies dramatically depending on whether they end up in a forum or end up on a product page written by a product manager, and so on. So what our product does, what our technology does, is we help companies like Samsung in this case to speak with one voice, which is whether it is marketing or product management or support or whatever kind of content you are creating, all the content that you are trading with the consumers, we help you speak with one voice, one tone, one style, one way of communicating with customers in the most effective way possible. Depending on the expectation of the consumer. If it is a CIO you're talking to, you should be projecting a certain tone and a style. If you are talking to a consumer, you should be projecting a different tone and a style. Even within the same company, let's say take Cisco as a company, they make high-end routers and talk to IT directors and buyers of that ilk, and they used to make Linksys routers in which they are talking to consumers. Within the same company, you might have two different tones and two different styles depending on the customer you are talking to. So we at Acrolinx have technology based on large amount of natural language processing, big data principles have applied over the last 10 years, and lot of learning that has taken place, machine learning that has taken place. We have tuned our algorithms to understand language and help companies tune the content they are developing to the audiences they are targeting. Right? This is the flip side of SEO, which is search engine optimization brings people and eyeballs to the content, and then what? If your content is not relevant to the eyeballs you bring to them, everything falls apart. What we do is the next mile, which is we make sure that the content that you're attracting people to is relevant to what they are looking for, and it's speaking in the tone that they would expect. So we are bringing together very exciting natural language processing algorithms, lots of big data and machine learning behind that, to bring it all together to help our large enterprise software and B2B, B2C kind of companies project their unique voice, project their unique brand, project their tone of voice to their consumers, their partners, their suppliers in what we say speaking with one voice. So
thanks. So we have 10 minutes for questions. We are running a little bit late. So there are two audience mics here. If anybody has any questions, we can, for the gentleman here. Does anybody have questions?
So there's a lot of talk about big data, and there's already a lot of technologies available in big data, Hadoop, and there's been a lot of new infrastructure coming in big data. So my question to Amol and others, what kind of the next step in big data? And people talk about big data application. Kumar mentioned that can be one example of big data. Bloomreach, another companies consider another example of the big data application. So what do you guys think about next step in big data world?
I'll take a crack at this. I think that this is the second or third time somebody has asked me, maybe second time, where what's coming next in big data, or would it be worthwhile starting a big data company? I personally feel that this question is a little bit malformed. in the sense that we should be thinking about what customer problem we are solving rather than how we are solving it. Big data is the how part of it, right? What customer problem you are solving. You have seen many examples right here. Business intelligence and analytics, natural language processing, advertisement, all of it, because he's doing infrastructure. But the problem, the real question is, what is the problem you are trying to solve? In which domain? And does that then require large amount of data processing? There used to be a time when a problem solving meant large amount of data processing, then we shied away from it a little bit because it was expensive. So the only thing that big data has changed is that it's no longer expensive and you don't have to be afraid of that problem. And you can go much farther and much faster in solving that problem. But I would start first with what is the problem that we are trying to solve, who is the consumer? And I will, Yogen is here, I have to say a story about Yogen to relate this back. In 1996, Yogen may or may not remember this, so in 1996 we started a company called Obelix. And Yogen was one of the VCs we saw who had looked at Obelix to fund us. And Obelix started with a fairly mediocre technology, I will say. You know, looking back, it was kind of asinine that we started a company based on the premise we started it. Anyway, one day we had an office in Cupertino. Yogen came by to visit us, and he sat with us and he listened to the pitch. And after an hour, he asked one question that has still remained with me all these years. And I've learned, Yogen doesn't remember, I'm sure he doesn't remember. But this question has remained with me since 1996. And I've always asked this question whenever some entrepreneurial opportunities come up. The question was, are you selling vitamin pills or are you selling painkillers? That's the way he posed it to us, which is, are you making something that is, you know, if you take it, it's okay. If you don't take it, it's okay. Vitamins, if you forget to take it, it's not going to hurt. But if you have a toothache and you need a painkiller, you need it, right? So the question was that was posed to us, and actually it was a kind of a nerve-rattling question for us as a company, because what we were selling, we knew was vitamins, but we were trying to pretend like it was painkillers. And when that question was asked, and it took a lot of soul searching to even come to our own recognition ourselves that we were really doing vitamins, we are on the path and we kept doing what we were doing, and a year later we completely transformed the company and went to a different path and started solving different problems. In any case, the way I would ask your question is, what is the problem you are solving? Is it relevant? Is it a painkiller? And then look at big data applying or not applying, frankly. I'm sorry if I took off in a different direction.
Yeah, next question from Shilpi.
This is kind of a generic question to all of you, especially from an entrepreneur who is in an early stage company, and you all have been at any point been there. So whenever you start, and again, if you think you have a painkiller, not the vitamin pill, then you always see that if the market is big enough, then you will have a competition and some established competition, right? So when you think about the strategy about your company, when you really start, right, you're in a early stage, how do you think about the big competition and then make decisions in terms of being relevant and being 2 years ahead? Because you have limited resources, you have limited dollars, right? And a big competition might have all the money to put forward and get ahead of you. So how did you guys face those kind of decisions in your early stage career, especially with your entrepreneur, when you were an entrepreneur, and how did you make those decisions? And maybe there is something which kind of helped you, and if you could share that experience, that would be very helpful.
I don't want to be hogging the mic, but I think
Urshit, can you let Urshit take it?
Yeah. So one quick, two things I'll say. Don't be afraid of large companies. They will move a lot slower than you will. And by doing a startup is always an irrational endeavor anyway to start with. Nobody should be doing startups. It doesn't make any sense. So it is irrational to start with. Don't be afraid of it and just jump in is the way I would put it.
Let each one respond, that's fine.
So
in general, I think wanting to do a company has to be for a certain mission, and there has to be that belief. Because I think if you do well with your startup, you'll end up doing well financially. But there are better ways to do, easier ways to do financially in the valley. Typically ends up being finding the next hot company and letting the options ride rather than kind of getting too worried about titles. So this is the way I look at it. Back to one of the attributes I was making on when I would look at market trends, which of these will be trends where startups succeed, which of these will be trends where incumbents will succeed, things like that. So the good news in the valley is that if you typically find a new trend and you solve a real problem and you solve it very well, whether that becomes a standalone company or not, there'll often be enough buyers for it. Of course, the cost or the price for that strategic acquisition will very often be a function of how far the company went, how crowded that segment was, and how willing the buyers are to pay for that certain strategic segment. And every once in a while you find some microcosms segments where acquisition prices become very irrational, but it's hard to kind of predict that when you start these companies. When I look at the enterprise infrastructure or enterprise application areas and segments and things like that, the way I tend to look at it is that I see what is the real sort of big disruption that is happening here. As part of this disruption, where are the dollars really going to move from this class of customer to that class of customers? Among the incumbents, which of these are going to get caught flat-footed? Because one of the challenges a large company almost always has is if I'm used to selling something at a high premium or margin, it's hard for me to sell something that is commoditized, right? So there was this point that Manoj mentioned about as we as Zscaler, we have to disrupt ourselves or get disrupted. That is much easier to do when you are a few hundred or maybe a few thousand people and have a strong visionary co-founder who's willing to kind of go ahead and sort of disrupt yourself. But most large companies end up finding that you can get the best next-gen product, but if they're selling that next-gen product comes at the expense of lowering revenue with the current product. So you want to kind of find which of these are going to be sort of, and then how is the ecosystem probably going to emerge out of that end. It's a given that customer delight, best product technology, those are given. You want to be able to go ahead and do that. And often one of those is, how is it that this time around when we do it, especially when there's a big incumbent sort of spend area, I don't have to do all of that laundry list of features. How are the customer needs going to align such that I'm really delivering something that they really care about and not all of this other stuff? And then how is there going to be enough white space for the startup to kind of go in and get to the first $25 million a quarter in revenue, because from there then it becomes much harder for a large company to even try and build something in-house after that, because an exec in a large company has to say, do I really go and invest $50 million a year to compete and participate in this market where initial revenues are going to be only $25 million, or do I spend that $50 million to build the next gen for my this next $2, $3, $4 billion product? So there's definitely a lot of this analysis that can kind of happen. And if you have been in a domain or an area where you have a network, you can kind of get a lot of that data back. So not a very specific answer, but just touching on sort of the range of points to think through. To say, is this where I want to go and spend the next 5, 7, 10 years of my life?
Prateek, you want to?
It is a really tough question. So a lot of factors go into it, but you will definitely find some buyers for the technology or the solution that you're starting a company for. I think for me, the critical thing is it going to cross that chasm, right? Is it going to become mainstream? And to me, that's more about positioning and differentiation. So my suggestion is going to be in the direction of focus on how is it differentiated in the marketplace. Is there